when I accepted the position as an administrative assistant for the HOA board in our suburban neighborhood. I genuinely thought it would be a quiet job, some paperwork, emails, calendars, and maybe the occasional heated conversation about lawn heights or paint colors. The interview had seemed harmless enough, and everyone on the board smiled politely. The president of the HOA, however, didn't smile at all. That was Karen. From the moment I shook her hand, I felt it. She gave me that too firm grip, the kind meant to assert dominance, and her eyes scanned me like she was already picking out flaws. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and heels that clicked sharply with every step, Karen carried herself like a queen among peasants. You know the type: meticulously dyed platinum hair, overdrawn lips, and a tone that suggested she was always one sentence away from saying, "Do you know who I am?" I was given a rundown of my duties by the former assistant before she left. "She'll test you," the woman whispered as she handed me a stack of folders. "Don't let her see fear." I laughed at the time, thinking it was just a joke. It wasn't, not even a little. Karen had just been elected HOA president a month before I joined. From what I gathered, she won the position mostly because the other candidate dropped out due to a family emergency. No one was especially excited about her win, except Karen herself. She treated the position like it made her the ruler of a small country. In her eyes, the HOA was her kingdom, and she was the reigning monarch. The other board members, Vice President Alan, Treasurer Sarah, and Secretary Mark, barely tolerated her, but she didn't care. She was president. That meant she was in charge, period. It didn't take long for her to assert control. She started by demanding that all communication go through her. "I don't care if the board wants to vote on something," she snapped one morning as I walked in with my coffee. "If they don't go through me, it doesn't happen." "But the bylaws," I started to reply, trying to point out the clear procedures in the HOA's own rulebook. She cut me off. "Forget the bylaws. I'm the president now. If anyone asks, you tell them I said no." The crazy part, she wasn't joking. One day, Alan asked me to send out an email reminder about the upcoming community meeting. I prepared the notice and showed it to Karen out of courtesy. She frowned, crossed her arms, and said, "No, change the date. We're moving the meeting the next week. I have a spa appointment." But the whole board agreed on this date. "It's already been circulated to the residents," I replied, stunned. "I don't care. I'm not changing my plans for anyone. Reschedule it, and don't copy Alan on the email either. Just say it's postponed due to scheduling conflicts." That was the first time I realized Karen wasn't just overbearing. She was manipulative, and worse, she was trying to reshape the HOA into a personal tool for her own ego. Still, I needed the job, so I complied carefully, watching each step I took as if I were walking a tightrope. Then came the micromanagement. She'd demand that I type meeting minutes in a very specific font. If I used Arial, she'd yell. I said Calibri. If I brought her documents stapled on the top left, she'd rip them apart and throw them back at me, always in the corner diagonally, not straight. She even once made me reprint and rebind 60 copies of the community newsletter because she didn't like the way the margin on the first page looked. Not because anything was wrong, just because it didn't feel right to her. I started documenting everything: emails, texts, even voice memos. I didn't trust her, and I had a feeling she'd eventually throw me under the bus for something petty just to avoid taking responsibility. The real tension hit a boiling point when she handed me a handwritten note that said, "From now on, you don't send anything to the board unless I personally approve it. No documents, no meeting summaries, not even a weather update. Everything goes through me first." She even signed it. I raised an eyebrow as I read it. "Are you sure this is what you want? This could delay responses or even violate transparency requirements for board communication." She leaned back in her chair and smirked. "I'm the president. That means my word is the final say. You just do what I tell you." I forced a smile and nodded. "Of course. I'll follow your directions exactly." I should have known better. Karen didn't want an assistant. She wanted a servant, a buffer between her poor decisions and the people who had to live with them. The rest of the board had no idea what she was doing behind closed doors because she was controlling the flow of information so tightly. And now, thanks to her directive, I was the gatekeeper on her terms. That day, I started compiling every document she altered, every instruction she gave, and every time she ordered me to go against protocol, not out of malice at first, just to protect myself in case she tried to blame me. But the more she abused her power, the more I realized something. Karen was building her own downfall, brick by brick, and all I had to do was follow her blueprints exactly. It wasn't just internal chaos. Residents were growing frustrated. They couldn't understand why their emails went unanswered, or why board meetings kept getting rescheduled. One man showed up at the office demanding to know why his complaint about a broken community fence hadn't been addressed in weeks. I told him the board hadn't reviewed it yet because Karen hadn't approved it to be shared. He stormed out, furious. I mentioned the growing discontent to Karen during our one-on-one. That Friday, people are starting to ask questions. I warned her gently, let them. They can't do anything. I'm in charge, she said dismissively, sipping her diet soda. You just keep following my orders, and you'll be fine. And that's when it clicked. I would follow her orders, to the letter, word for word. I would do exactly what she said, nothing more, nothing less. I wouldn't offer guidance. I wouldn't remind her of policies. I wouldn't soften the blow. I would let her run this ship exactly how she wanted, right into the iceberg. My compliance wouldn't just be obedient. It would be malicious. So, when she edited the next meeting's minutes to reflect a vote that never happened, I didn't correct her. I didn't push back. I printed the version she gave me, attached it to the board's email chain, and sent it out with a single sentence, per President Karen's instruction. Attached are the official minutes of last month's meeting. That email would light the fuse. But I didn't care. Karen wanted power. I was going to let her have all of it, every bit of it, enough to hang herself with. The email went out at precisely 9:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. The subject line read, Approved Meeting Minutes, April Board Session. I attached the document exactly as Karen had edited it, which meant it now included a false record of a board vote approving a $15,000 landscaping overhaul. In reality, that vote never passed. In fact, the board members had strongly opposed it during the meeting, and I had noted that clearly in the original version of the minutes. But Karen had scribbled all over them with red pen like a school teacher, correcting a failing student's test. Change this, delete that, make it unanimous. Don't mention Alan's objection, and so on. Her final version read like a victory speech, clean, perfect, and utterly fake. But she was the president, and I had my marching orders. The body of the email simply read, as directed by President Karen. Attached are the official HOA board meeting minutes. For April, I CC'd the full board and even added Karen herself, just to make sure she couldn't claim ignorance later. The first reply came 10 minutes later from Alan, the vice president. It was short but furious. Karen, what is this? This isn't what we discussed or voted on. Then Sarah, the treasurer, chimed in. There was no approval for that landscaping contract. I said we needed more quotes, and Mark seconded that. Where's the record of that conversation? Karen didn't reply. Not for an hour. She probably thought ignoring it would make it go away, but the board wasn't going to let it drop. Mark, the secretary, weighed in next. I take my own notes during meetings. These minutes don't match what happened. We didn't even vote. This version is fraudulent. The word fraudulent must have struck a nerve because that's when Karen finally responded. An all-caps message that made it clear she was unraveling. I am the HOA president. I have final say on minutes. This is enough for debate. You could almost hear the panic behind her keyboard, but the damage had already been done. The board now saw it plain as day that Karen had tried to rewrite official records to suit her agenda, and with my email as proof that she had ordered the changes, she couldn't wriggle her way out of it. Later that afternoon, Alan requested an emergency board meeting. Karen tried to cancel it, of course, saying she was out of town for a private engagement, would not tolerate such disrespect to her office, but the rest of the board voted to proceed without her. HOA bylaws allowed for a quorum of members to meet even if the president was absent, and they had more than enough. I sat quietly in the corner of the conference room as the meeting began. Sarah opened the session by laying out the problem. We have a situation with the minutes that were sent out this morning. They were deliberately altered to misrepresent a vote that didn't happen. Mark backed her up, citing his handwritten notes. Then Alan turned to me. Can you explain what happened with those minutes, please? I nodded and handed over both versions, the original draft and the one Karen had edited. President Karen instructed me, in writing, to send her version to the board. She specifically told me not to share anything unless she approved it first. So I complied. Alan read through the email I had printed as evidence. His lips tightened. And this was the only version she permitted you to send? Yes, I said simply. She edited it herself and gave it back to me. I followed her directive exactly. There was a long pause as the board reviewed both documents. The contrast was glaring. In Karen's version, the landscaping plan had unanimous support, and the board had given her full discretion to execute it. In the real minutes, 2 members objected, no vote was held, and they agreed to revisit the issue next month. It was blatant falsification. The meeting ended with a unanimous decision to request a formal legal review. That night, the whole attorney was looped into the email thread. I sent along all my documentation and copies of Karen's handwritten edits, the timestamped directive she'd given me, and the full email trail. It was thorough and clear. The next few days were oddly quiet. Karen didn't come into the office. She didn't answer texts or calls. Residents started emailing complaints again. Why hadn't their concerns been addressed? Why were their questions ignored? Why did the newsletter mention landscaping that wasn't approved? I forwarded everything to the board. Karen had ordered me not to respond without her permission, and now I was sticking to that. Malicious compliance in full effect. By Friday, the legal opinion came in. The attorney's letter was crisp and damning. Altering official hold records was a serious breach of fiduciary responsibility. It exposed the board to potential liability, especially if residents began challenging decisions based on false documentation. The board had grounds to remove Karen from her position, or at the very least, demote her and strip her of administrative powers. An emergency vote was scheduled. The next board meeting was packed not just with members, but with residents too. Word had gotten out. People had started talking, and the community wanted answers. Karen showed up late, sunglasses on indoors, and glared at everyone like they were traitors. Alan stood and addressed the crowd. We're here today because our board's integrity has been compromised. Minutes were falsified, and decisions were misrepresented to this community. We have proof, and we've reviewed it with legal counsel. This is not about personal differences. This is about trust and responsibility. Karen snapped. This is a witch hunt. I've done more for this neighborhood than anyone else on this board. This is political, and you all know it. Mark held up the 2 versions of the minutes. Did you write these changes, Karen? Did you tell our assistant to send them as official? Karen folded her arms and refused to answer. Sarah spoke next. We took an oath to serve the community. That means following rules and being transparent, not rewriting history for personal projects. The vote was swift. 3 in favor of demoting Karen to a general board member, 0 opposed. Karen was stripped of her presidency, and Alan was appointed interim president until the next election cycle. Karen stormed out, muttering about lawsuits and conspiracies. After the meeting, several residents came up to me and thanked me for keeping records. We knew something was wrong. One woman whispered, "I'm glad someone was brave enough to say it." But I hadn't really been brave. I had simply followed orders to the letter. Karen had wanted control. She got it. She wanted to be the final word. She was, and in doing so, she created her own downfall, all because she couldn't see past her own ego long enough to realize that absolute power never ends well. The next morning, I came into work to find Karen's nameplate removed from the front office. Her files had been boxed up, and Alan left a note on my desk that said, "Great job. Thank you for being thorough." I sipped my coffee with a grin, not out of spite, but out of satisfaction. I hadn't broken any rules. I hadn't exposed her out of revenge. I had simply followed instructions exactly, and in the end, that's what brought her down. Malicious compliance had never felt so satisfying.